to find the intersection. My name is Paul Dezay. I'm here in Columbus, Indiana, Sandy Hook United Methodist Church. It's good to be with you on this Wednesday. It's Old Testament Day. We're in the book of Isaiah as we prepare for the third Sunday of Advent. And so we've been in Isaiah on Wednesdays, and we've kind of walked through three sections, or at least two sections up to this point, and now we'll be in the third section of Isaiah. And so the first section kind of dealt with judgment. The second section dealt with hope of a rescue, and now the third section deals with the return from exile and the hope being come to pass. So there we go. So I hope you're doing all right today, and I hope you are enjoying this way of studying the Bible. So let's look at Isaiah chapter 61, verses 1 to 4, verses 8 to 11. And these might sound familiar to you, especially the first few verses, because Jesus quoted this. He read from the scroll of Isaiah 61 when he was in the synagogue in Nazareth, his hometown. He read the scroll. He made a few words about the scroll and how God's going to use all people, and people, even your enemies, and they ended up wanting to throw him off of a cliff. So this is what he read. And so if you take a look at this and you look at what's going on here, I'd say there's two key words that I see in this passage, or two kind of themes, is the idea of salvation and mission. So let's talk about salvation here. So what does it mean to be saved? What is salvation in Isaiah 61? Well, what Isaiah say is salvation? And so take a look at what this anointed one, the suffering servant, who ends up being Jesus, says that he is called to do, or anointed to do. He says, "Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news, gospel, right, to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, to release the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn." And so what Isaiah is saying, it's time to return home. And this anointed one, this and typically anointed, the Spirit of the Lord upon him, typically that's a prophet that receives the Spirit in that way. So this prophet is going to announce the good news, and he is going to lead a mission to do particular things. And so Isaiah would say that salvation is this good news of liberty, release, comfort, and jubilee. Now, Jubilee is an incredibly important topic in the Old Testament in the book of Leviticus. It's a period of kind of a reset. It's where God's grace covers the people in such a way that those who have been slaves and those who had lost property to misfortune or whatever, things are kind of made even. It's a grand mulligan of economic and social equality. It's an incredibly important concept because it communicates God's ideal. So salvation is this God rescuing the people to set people free from the things that burden them spiritually, from the things that burden them in a social setting, financially, and so that all of God's people are able to flourish and thrive. And again, this is a picture, this is not new, it's a picture of Revelation 21, 1 to 5, when God will make all things new, and there'll be no more pain and no more death and no more tears. That's God's concept and vision of our future. And so this Isaiah passage is a picture of that, of the new heavens and the new earth. And so salvation would be this flourishing for all of God's people and those that are prisoners being set free. And this idea of Jubilees is this idea of kind of a reset, a mulligan, a grand opportunity, a reversal of fortunes, reverse the table, turn the table. And so it's an incredibly important concept here. It's described, this idea of salvation is described in verse number 4 as a restored city, and that makes sense, the New Jerusalem. And also in verse number 11 as an abundant garden. And so this salvation that God is bringing, we can't bring it ourselves, is a salvation that is described as a restored city and a abundant garden. Now, the second question is what is the mission of God's people? What is the mission? If this is what God does through the Messiah, then what is our mission? Well, I think our mission is when we, as God's people, focus in on the people that the Messiah is focusing on and on. In other words, we put our attention to the recipients of that good news, the oppressed, the brokenhearted, the captives, the prisoners, the mournful, those who are struggling. We, as God's people, see what they are going through. We hear their cries, and we are part of God's people following the footsteps of the Messiah, the anointed one, the one that the Spirit is upon. We do what he does. We are a part of that kingdom, this new heavens and new earth, of being a part of that. And then the second aspect of mission is this idea that the other nations, it says in verse 9, will notice God's people. They'll notice there's something different about these people, which of course makes sense because Israel was supposed to be the light to the Gentiles, light to the world. They're supposed to show the world who this God is. And so we see in verse number 9 that all the nations are taking notice. There's this return from exile. There's this setting people free. There's a jubilee. There's what people are living as a different kind of people. And so therefore the nations begin to notice. That's an important part of mission. So what do we do with this? What do we do with this passage? Well, God's in the salvation business, right? And the church is in God's missions business, right? So we follow in the footsteps of what God does in our lives and the lives of others. We live that way out, and people will notice as we live that way out that we are to be people of jubilee, that we are to be a people of the year of the Lord's favor. We are to be living in such a way that grace is how we operate, not by the political systems of the day. God's people are to live different. And so I find that as good news. Hopefully you find it as good news. And so what did you get out of this passage? If you'd share your thoughts in the comments about salvation and mission and whatever else you see as you read through Isaiah 61. It's good to be with you guys. Hey, you take care, grace and peace. I'll be back tomorrow as we read Psalm 126. See ya.